going to go talk to Brian Trascher, the trash can, and learn about lobbying and what's going on in D.C. All right, Chuck, we're welcoming to the Blunt Force Truth Octagon. By the way, I went to an MMA fight this week, to a real octagon.
Of course you did.
I didn't see you in there, though. Anyways, we're welcoming to the Octagon of Truth Brian Trascher, otherwise known by President Trump, we understand, as the trash can. So, welcome to Blunt Force Truth, trash can.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy to be here.
I want to also make it clear that he is in the, United Airlines lounge as we speak?
Oh, surely, yes, the American Airlines.
American Airlines. So no one has beaten you and drug you out yet, have they?
No, actually, I could use the money. I wish they would.
All right. Well, if they do, we will record video. We will have the evidence of them beating you and dragging you out. But, folks, if you do hear some strange sounds, those are just, many unhappy travelers that are strolling behind Mr. Trash Can while he is trying to be on Blunt Force Truth. So, Brian Trascher, you are the author of a book called Laws and Sausage, which is a reference I've used many times of not wanting to see either one of those made. So, Chuck, take it away. Where do you want to start?
Well, you already started. That's okay. Tell me what you do, Brian. What exactly? You're in Washington right now. So while you're in Washington, what are you going to do?
Well, I'm actually going to go to the Yankees-Nats game tonight because no, we have an office up here. I'm a professional lobbyist with a firm called Gulf South Strategies based out of New Orleans. And
you have an office on K Street?
No, we couldn't afford K. We're like on M, I think.
You're on M. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, it's already pre-plugged into the Uber, so I can't even tell you what the address is.
Any phone numbers anymore either.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm actually in DC this week because every year we host a fundraiser at the Capitol Hill Club. And it's a crawfish bowl. Chuck, you've been in New Orleans, how we do it. And the folks up here can't get good boiled crawfish. So we do it for them once a year. And we got about, I think 40 or 50 RSVPs from members of Congress. So we're looking forward to it. Okay.
So what do you lobby for?
Oh, well, that's easy. The highest bidder. No, just kidding. So the
well, but that's a joke and everything. But whenever anyone hears the word lobbyist, they go, "Oh, lobbyist." And there are good and bad aspects of lobbying. Correct?
That's absolutely true. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to answer your question real quick, and it's a good segue into why I wrote the book. We're a boutique firm. We try to, lobbying is a lot like acting. You can get typecast if you stick to one industry. So we're in multiple verticals, but right now our big ones are healthcare on the drug treatment side. We have some tech firms that specialize in tax collection. We have some shipbuilders down in Louisiana. We're just involved with a lot of different stuff. But one of the reasons why I wrote the book was because after the election, I noticed there were so many people protesting in the streets. And I just remember sitting there watching them on TV, thinking about how much they were wasting their time because, I know how the process works. And that's the only way to get things. And even knowing how the process works sometimes doesn't get anything done. But you have a better shot than just holding a sign in the street and marching. And then you mentioned, lobbyists can be like a 4-letter word. But I kind of wanted to give people a very 101 understanding of what it is, how they can apply some of the basic principles of it. And if you read the foreword written by former Congressman Bob Livingston, he talks about how the industry can be an honorable profession for those who follow the ethical guidelines and do it right.
Well, the problem is we always envision, I do, people who are in Congress all of a sudden leave Congress and they become lobbyists because they know the system, they know how it works, they know who to talk to, they've made their relationships. And the average person, the average voter, just doesn't have anything like that at their disposal. Nothing that I'm aware of other than their vote. Correct?
It's usually nothing they know of at their disposal, which, again, this is one of the reasons why
let us know what we can do. Tell us.
Well, so first of all, I go through some very basic things about, trying to figure out whatever your issue is, figuring out what the committee of jurisdiction is. And what that means is it a local issue? Is it a state issue? Is it a federal issue? In which case you're talking to city council people, state legislators, or members of Congress.
Well, let's stay with federal and let's
yeah,
talk about that.
Yeah. So, it goes from everything as basic as how to go about crafting your issue maybe getting yourself some publicity, getting yourself some other people to join your cause, and then go ahead and try to start making appointments with your members of Congress or any members of Congress that will be relevant to that point.
I'm going to give you my cause, okay?
Yeah.
My cause is government overspending. Spending us into a $21 trillion hole that we've got to scrape our way out of somehow. So how do I possibly get to Congress and say, don't spend so much money when you're not collecting enough money?
Well, first of all, spending more than they take in is done mostly out of tradition, I think, here in Congress. But what's funny is that as you were talking about overspending, I wish I could have turned my camera because former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe walked by.
She said an overspender for you.
Guy, definitely, yeah. So I wish he could have joined us, but yeah, that's a tough one, Chuck, because the thing is that we have now become a nation that, at least at the Main Street level, does not fear debt. I mean, we fear our own debt, credit card debt, loans, things like that, but we don't fear our national debt anymore because we print the money and what we don't have, we borrow. And even though it's not sustainable, the average person doesn't know that.
Well, the average person doesn't know it because they can't get their head around $21 trillion. They don't even understand. I mean, I don't understand it. So how could, I just don't get it. How do you do that? So you're in the lobbying business, and what you're trying to do is get government to spend money with you, correct?
Well, I'm more or less trying to get them to adopt policies that benefit my clients. In some cases, like for instance, my shipbuilders, they're going after Navy and Coast Guard contracts. So, but that, those are competitive bid processes. So,
yeah. So,
but it doesn't hurt to have relationships on the Hill when they're doing that kind of work.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know President Trump? He's given you a nickname, Trash Can. So, somebody else that used to do this all the time, oddly enough, I'm going to bring his name up, is John Wayne, Duke Wayne. It was a friend of mine, and he nicknamed everybody and he couldn't remember his own children's name. He had nicknames for them. And you're saying Trump would never remember you unless he gave you the nickname.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it seem like I talk to him on a regular basis, but I met him back in 2012. I think he was giving a speech in New Orleans, and at the time he was flirting with the idea of running for president, and basically told him that if he does, I'd want to get on board and help him out, and kind of stayed in contact, and then I heard from him not too long after that he said he was going to endorse Mitt Romney, but I don't want to quote him out of context, but he said something that I'll just say it left me the impression that he was not confident in Governor Romney's chances to win the election. So he anticipated that the White House would be an open seat in 2016 and that he did plan on running. And that ultimately came to fruition. And so I got on board, started out doing some local stuff in my home state of Louisiana. And then from there, just expanded until ultimately he became president. And I don't work for the government now. I don't work directly for him, but do a lot of things to try to support his agenda. How
do you get a job being a lobbyist? I mean, what's your background? Were you ever in politics?
No, my parents lost a bet with God. And that's basically how it started. No, I actually, when I was in high school, Congressman Bob Livingston, I referenced earlier, who wrote the foreword to my book, came and visited my school and talked to my civics class about government. And I think I just became enamored with the idea of becoming an elected official. And although that's not where the cards took my life as far as like running for office, I learned quickly when I was in college that I was a lot better at being the guy behind the guy than the actual guy. And so I worked on a lot of campaigns. I worked for a former Louisiana Governor, Mike Foster, in his press office, which was a great experience, kind of catapulted me into a lot of the things. And I started doing corporate government affairs. And after Hurricane Katrina, I took a few years off from it and then started up my own shop again with a partner about 8 or 9 years ago.
Okay. All right.
So how do we control the issues with lobbyists? So we know that there's a lot of problems that arise that lobbyists create. But we also know that there's lobbyists who do good things. So I'm going to give you an example. The NRA has lobbyists, which are obviously, working Congress on a regular basis, trying to protect the Second Amendment. We would call that a positive thing. but then we might say that there's lobbyists working for an insurance company that is trying to alter insurance bills, which isn't to our benefit. How do you get the good how do you get the good without the bad? I mean, should lobbying be banned completely? Is it something we have to have? Because you hear people talk, Chuck, and you and I have heard that on the show before about the need to just get rid of lobbyists.
Well, our impression is this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. My impression is a lobbyist goes to Washington, says to a congressman, "We'll support you with money, with all this kind of stuff, if you'll support us." In other words, we'll give you money if you'll take care of us. Is that just a basic, simple concept? Is that wrong? Maybe I'm just idealistic, but I still believe that the merits of a solid argument can be very persuasive to elected officials. However, campaign contributions is the equivalent of the Disney Fast Pass here in Washington, D.C. But you mentioned banning lobbyists altogether. I mean, there's no way that would happen under the First Amendment, because we don't do anything that every single person in this country has a right to go and petition their elected officials. And just because I get paid to do it is no different than somebody who is going just because there's an issue they care about that they want to talk about. Now, the fact that I do get paid to do it means that I have to follow certain ethical guidelines. I have to file quarterly reporting, and in my state, monthly reporting on my activities and how much I'm spending and who I'm donating to and things like that. And so it's all a matter of public record. If anybody wants to question my activities, they can use Google and go find it themselves. Mm-hmm.
The Obamacare. We hear a lot of people talk that a lot of that bill was written by lobbyists or written by insurance companies. As far as you know, is there any truth in that?
There's 100% truth in that. I don't think that there was a single federal employee that ever looked at that monstrosity of a bill before it ended up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. That's my opinion.
Is that typical? Because I have the impression that congressmen, senators just really don't even read bills that they vote on. They just are, by leadership comes up and says, okay, this is where we're going to go and this is what you're going to do. And if you don't do this, there's punishment involved.
Yeah, it'd be physically impossible for every member of Congress to read every piece of legislation that comes across. And especially in Congress versus state legislatures, most of what they vote on is procedural moves and not actual laws. So it would be impossible to read everything. But what they do is, most of the conscientious members will read the digest. And of course, if something's going to be controversial, they usually know about it in advance.
Digest version.
Yeah, they have staff that goes through it and will kind of automatically alert them to if it's something that they care about or would be for or against. And so they know, they can kind of see the hot issues coming down the pike.
So basically what you're saying is that the staff of a senator or a congressman are more responsible for the reaction to a bill or a new law being passed than the congressman or senator themselves. Which I find fascinating. We elect these people to represent us, and they hire a bunch of other people who basically represent them, and then they take a consensus of opinion of thousands and thousands of staff members, and then they put together their votes. It seems insane.
Well, one of the things I talk about in my book is the importance of knowing and identifying who the key staff members are and how to, because you have a lot of people who are maybe just from a old school standpoint used to going and talking straight to a decision maker. That hardly ever happens your first time trying to get into a congressional office. And it's important to understand that those staffers hold the keys to the kingdom. And they can make you or break you. So they do have a tremendous amount of influence. But to play devil's advocate, these members have a tremendous amount they have insane schedules. My good friend, House Whip Steve Scalise, is on his way here right now on a plane. And I look at that guy's daily schedule, and I haven't been shot, and I don't think I could keep up with his schedule. So without a staff, there's no way he'd be able to have a grasp on everything that he's got to look at and vote on every day.
The lobbyists, do lobbyists become an extension of a House member's staff? Do they sometimes serve as consultants or advisors?
I think that they can serve as an informal advisor on a particular issue. If you are representing something that the member cares a lot about, and they start to see you kind of as the go-to resource to get information and updates on industry or on a bill or some kind of a regulation. Yeah, you can be. I mean, it's almost out of a sheer habit. Whenever I'm in DC, I call on just about every member of my state's delegation just to let them know I'm in town, let them know what I'm working on. And if I have something I really need to, talk with them about, I'll make an appointment, make sure I get in to see them. But it just depends on what issues are going on at the moment. Right now, they're only happy I'm in town because they know I'm going to feed them crawfish. So,
so you deal with Democrats and Republicans.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually fortunate, my home state and my home region of my state, I have the majority whip of the House as well as the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus right in my backyard. And I have good relationships with both. And they serve as conduits to, other members or committees that end up being important to me.
So you have to be apolitical.
Oh no, I'm definitely partisan, and sometimes I get told I should shut up about it. But I think at the end of the day, well, yeah, I mean, it's like anything else. Sometimes clients get a little nervous that I'm gonna, tick off the wrong person. But most of the people that know me know what I'm really like, not just my superhero costume. And so, and that's what it's all about. It's like anything else. These folks have to get to know you on a personal level. And also too, it's about having a track record. It's about going and, trying to help them out and coming through, doing what you say you're going to do. All those things are, important currency in Washington. I'm
going to ask you a couple of inside baseball questions. And if you don't feel comfortable asking them or answering them, I understand, but because it is your job. That we're talking about to a certain extent. You get to know these people personally, I suppose. At least you get to know their staffs personally. What's the difference today with working with a progressive Democrat, with a real progressive Democrat, and earlier on Democrats that weren't particularly progressive because it's changed now. At least their identification has changed. And a conservative Republican?
So I always like to say that it's really just professional wrestling. There's really no difference between the two. In their campaigning, in their talking points, they all have their personal beliefs. But at the end of the day, Congress is just it's like a live cattle auction, and sometimes in the heat of it, what you believe doesn't matter as much as placing the right bid. So it might be a bad analogy, but I can tell you that one of the main, and I've never seen partisan gridlock in 20 years of doing this like there's going on right now. There are really good bills that probably have bipartisan support that can't even get on the calendar because of gridlock, and it has nothing to do with that bill. That somebody's mad about something else, and so they're holding up the schedule.
So it's personal.
It's 100% personal. And one of the problems is that, back in the day, and I say back in the day, I'm not that old, but, I would say even as recently as the 80s and early to mid 90s, right around the Clinton administration, members of Congress really kind of lived here in DC, and they went back to their districts, but then they started kind of getting criticized about, they bought a house up there and they've moved their families up there. They're not really part of the district anymore. And so they started kind of doing this commute. Now they come in on Tuesdays and they leave on Thursday nights or Friday mornings. They don't hang out with each other after work, and there's no personal relationships there. And I can tell you that that used to be kind of what used to drive these deals being able to be made years ago, whereas now you'll see the government shut down because there's no personal relationships there.
Mark? So these guys don't really know each other on a personal level.
They don't know each other. No, they don't. I mean, within the same caucus, you serve in a committee with somebody. People complain about, congressional junkets off to another country or whatever. I actually encourage that because when you get, if you put 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans on a plane and send them to Ghana together, they're going to have nobody to talk to but themselves, and they might get to know each other. And when they get home, maybe, they won't be so quick to call each other Nazis on CNN or whatever it is they're doing now.
Well, and I think your point is valid in as much as when we get to know people on a human level, that we're less likely to, accuse them of being, this single column Nazi, whatever the case is, when we know them. But I want to ask you though, and again, don't want to put you on a spot. I want to look at Chuck Schumer for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Chuck Schumer knows Donald Trump.
Knows him well.
Very well. I mean, his shoe size, believe me. And people probably don't even know how well those two guys know each other. They've known each other for over 40 years.
Right.
So what's the deal there? So there's a case where the personal relationship exists, but clearly Schumer is willing to throw 40 years of friendship, relationship, whatever the case is, out the window to move his version of his political agenda. Does that not appear to be the case?
Well, I mentioned professional wrestling earlier. The battles are scripted, and everybody knows exactly what's going to happen when they get into the ring. And that's probably why these wrestlers are friends offset, because they, everything in the ring is just acting. It's kind of the same way. I mean, I'm not saying that President and Senator Schumer have been close friends for 40 years, but they have known each other. They've lived in the same, city, and have both been involved in politics, and, Schumer more on the elected side, Trump kind of behind the scenes. But when you know somebody that long, it kind of doesn't matter whether you like them or not. There's a relationship there, whether you want to admit it or not. But Senator Schumer has a responsibility as the top elected Democrat in the country to hold the line on his partisan talking points and his caucus. And right now, it seems to be pretty popular just to, have Trump derangement syndrome on his side, and he has to kind of hold the line. Now, I will tell you that, he's extremely pleased about what happened in Jerusalem yesterday. And he's
the one who put the bill forward in 1998.
No question about it. And he publicly applauded the president.
Who were pleased.
That's right. At the State of the Union, he was the only one that stood up and clapped on his side of the aisle. He was the only one that stood up and clapped when the president mentioned moving the embassy to Jerusalem. But he did publicly applaud the president for it. He probably had to throw up in his mouth a little bit before he did it, but he did, and I give him credit for that.
Now, how's that sitting with the rest of his party, which is all thinking that Trump doing this is just
start a war?
Right. Everything's going to start.
Yeah. In the last 48 hours, in the last 48 hours, I've come to the astonishing revelation that apparently Democrats are like pro-Palestinian and not pro-Israel. I didn't know that before.
Really?
Yeah.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I tweeted that out like 5 years ago.
Yeah, I made a comment on social media somewhere about, this false narrative about, people being slaughtered in Gaza, where it's like, okay, it was their own leaders that told them to rush the fence, even though Israel had repeatedly warned them not to do that. And then somebody responded to me and said, well, did you know there's no weapons in Gaza? And I just kind of laughed. And I'm like, this is the kind of atrocious stupidity that we're dealing with. People have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, but of course they all have an opinion.
Well, that's where the mainstream media comes in and doesn't do their job. They have no interest in investing.
Oh, they're doing their job, Chuck.
Well, I
know. They're doing their job.
Their job is literally to be the Praetorian Guard for the Democrat Party, which is just amazing to me.
And they're doing well.
With very few exceptions. So most people aren't even informed. And, that's the way that goes. So let me ask you a question. Being a lobbyist, you're around all of this stuff, what's going on in Washington, how they think, both sides. Before I get to that question, we're going to take a break for a short commercial, and we'll be back at you in 2 and 2.
So, folks, you've probably heard over the weeks here on Blunt Force Truth, Chuck talking about his itching, dry skin, yes, which is actually something which is called senior itch. Or I know it always falls into.
It is funny every time you hear senior itch. It's like you expect a guy in a mariachi band to go, "Yes, I'm senior itch."
I think that makes you a racist. But anyways, it's not just senior itch. There's a real word for it. It's pruritus, and it's caused by, as we get older, our skin gets a little thinner, and the collagen layer kind of breaks down under the skin. So we start to get these random itches, and there's no rash. There's no reason for it. Sometimes I got to tell you, sometimes it makes senior citizens think that they're going a little crazy. It's like, well, maybe there's something wrong with me that I think there's an itch when there's nothing there.
Right.
But it's real. It's very real. And Dermend Anti-Itch is the solution to it.
I had this on my left forearm for a long time, and it drove me nuts until I really found this remedy, the anti-itch cream from Duramin. It's funny. I walked in my local pharmacy the other day, which is a little pharmacy here in Horseshoe Bay, Texas. And we also have a CVS. We have a Walgreens, but this was like 2 minutes from my door. And I walked in and I said to the guy who I know, I said, there's a product that I recommend on our show on Blunt Force Truth called Duramin. And it's an anti-itch cream, and you really ought to have this. I see all these other ones up here that are cortisone and everything else. I said, I've tried all those things, and they didn't work for me. Plus, I tore my skin up and everything else because they will thin your skin. And he seemed very interested. He said, well, I don't know whether our salesman represents them or not. And one of the girls said, oh, yeah, we have that. Look, come here. Let's go to the shelf. So we walked to the shelf, and here's Duramin products kind of hidden away. And I said, you need to get these things out front. They are awesome. And don't delude yourself thinking because these other brands are well known and all this kind of stuff, they're great. This stuff really works in seconds. And so he did.
So if you work at a Walgreens store, Chuck Woolery is going to show up and rearrange your planogram.
That's right. I'm going to rearrange your shelf. That's what I did with Pillsbury when I was a Pillsbury salesman.
So Duramin Anti-Itch is specially formulated to temporarily relieve what many people call senior itch.
Yep.
Duramin Anti-Itch Lotion is gentle, steroid-free, which is really important because steroids just thin your skin out more, by the way.
And you'll tear it up when you start to scratch. All of a sudden, you'll have bruises and tears on your skin and everything else. I've experienced it.
And most people don't realize that most of the creams that are out there are steroids because hydrocortisone is what most of them are, and that's a steroid. Mm-hmm. So you want to stay away from that. So Duramin's got, as you know, Chuck, it's a really good moisturizing lotion. It's a very nice product.
Absolutely.
And it has real medicine in it. It has a real medicine called I just blew that again. Pramoxine HCl. Why do they give things like that to me to say?
I have no idea.
You should be saying all
Why
of those
do they say
things.
Pramoxine what?
Pramoxine HCl.
Well, see, I don't think anybody's going to walk in and say, give me that Pramoxine HEL. They'll probably say, give me the Duramin anti-itch.
But they're still going to say, give me Duramin. So if your skin itches, if you have a visit from Senior Itch, pick up steroid-free Duramin moisturizing anti-itch lotion and all the other.
It's great for insect bites, too. Don't forget that.
That is.
Your children will love you for it.
And don't forget the other Duramin products, the the bruise relief product and the fragile skin product. You get it at CVS Pharmacy, Walgreens, and you can find most of the products, the other products you can find at Walmart and every place else. You, of course, must use Duramin all the time because you have bodacious T-bone hanging off of your left arm half of the day.
Bodacious T-bone, scratches, bruises. He does everything bad to me, and I love him. My bulldog.
How much does that bulldog weigh?
He's up to about 40 pounds now. He's a big one. He really is, but he's so cute.
It is not good to have a 40-pound bulldog hanging off of your forearm.
He wants your attention. He starts scratching like this, and on your forearms and on your hands, and and your only
solution to him is Duramin.
Duramin is the only solution. I have to bodacious T-bone.
Well, go try it, folks, and please let us know. We're hearing from a lot of people that they really love the product. We'd love to hear from you too.
So I was getting onto this, and that is we got the midterm elections coming up in a few months. Of course, you would think it started 2 years ago, but at least we know we have a few months left before November.
Right.
What are the Democrats going to run on? I already know what the Republicans are going to run on. If they're smart, they'll run on everything that Trump's done and been successful with. If they're smart, I'm not saying that they are that smart, but if they are, that's what they'll run on. So what are these Democrats going to run on? Do you have any sense of that?
I think that they have finally, in the last month or so, done a little bit of a gut check and realized that the whole kind of impeachment strategy is not working and the Mueller strategy is not working. So I think they are going to really just start pushing some really kind of wildly progressive ideas that they know will never happen, but will fire up their base.
Like free college and free health care.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, free everything. And I think that's what they're going to end up doing. And I think that the, Republicans just need to get away from the old crusty establishment, line of, God, guns, and apple pie. I mean, it's all fine and well, but I mean, it's not selling to people under the age of 50. I don't think so. Republicans have to quit being such nerds. You know, I tell them that all the time. Loosen up a little bit, you know, get with the program on things like gay marriage and you know, I'm not one of these believers in climate change, but I do believe in conservationism. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to protect the earth without thinking that the polar bears are going to die. You know what I'm saying?
Republicans already do that.
They don't toot their own horn enough about it, though.
They don't talk about it. Exactly right.
Exactly.
I'll give you an example. I hunt and I fish. My licenses go for protecting animals and protecting the environment for fish.
Right.
It's that simple. And anyway, so Trump has been a giant interrupter. I don't know how you've dealt with this, and I'm not sure Congress even understands it. I don't think anybody understands it. They just don't know what to expect from him, which I think is a good thing. He is not easily read, and the mainstream media can't read him. Nobody can read him, and yet he is successful. He does such what I heard a guy from an institute last night refer to him as a unconventional president. Well, is he? Yeah,
that's to say the least. You know, I can tell you from dealing with him during the campaign. You know, you're talking about a guy that has been in high level business for 40 years internationally, and he would always come in and he started out as a Democrat. He would dump a bunch of money on them, and of course, he's a guy that really likes to. He thinks he has really good ideas and he likes to share them with people. And then the Democrats weren't acting on it. So he said, all right, forget that. I'm going to be a Republican now. I'm going to start dumping money on those guys because they got to listen to me, right? They're desperate for money. And they came in and yesed him and shook his hand and took his money and didn't take his ideas. And so finally he just said, screw all y'all. I'm going to run for president. Then you'll have to listen to me. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty much what he did.
And I've said, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but I've said over and over again that Congress is in the business of creating problems, not solving them. And they create them, then they run on them, and then they talk about them for years and years and years and never solve anything. It's very similar to moving the what am I trying to say? What is it that what did he just move to?
Oh, the embassy?
The embassy.
Yeah, moving the embassy to Jerusalem.
Yeah, I went through 23 years.
Yeah, they talked about it for 23 years. He did it. So he is the kind of guy who will pull the trigger, but pull the trigger on things and solve the problems that are easily solved and easily done by making a decision. Congress doesn't want to make a decision because they're going to be held responsible for the decision. They don't know. You listen to all of these people, all this stuff today about is there going to be war and is this going to happen and is that going to happen? Everything is conjecture about what's going to happen in the future, and it's always bad. The attitudes of these panels on CNN, on MSNBC, even on Fox, they talk about these things as if they're going to happen, and this is a possibility, and that's a possibility. And Trump sees right through it and goes right to the heart of it and says, well, I'm going to show you what the possibility is. Bam, let's do this. I'm out of the Iran.
Right.
Bam, I'm moving the embassy. Bam, I'm doing that. And then they all have to scramble and try to deal with it. And on the left, they're saying it's a bad idea. On the right, they're saying it could be a good idea, but we're not sure. It's like they want the future to be laid out for them all the time, to be either good, bad, or indifferent, but they're always trying to lay out the future. These people need a crystal ball. It's just amazing to me when someone comes in and all of a sudden takes control of the horses and makes them go the right direction.
One of my favorite things about the election is that it hit the reset button on so-called experts. I mean, all these people, no matter which party was in charge, the sausage maker worked the same way. It just made different kind of sausage. And what Trump did is he walked into the country club pool and threw a Snickers in it while they were having a pool party. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, everybody noticed and was like, oh my God. And they were horrified, and he's just laughing, and that's just kind of how he is.
I was watching CNN on a few days ago, when Trump greeted the people from North Korea, the hostages.
The hostages.
Right.
And CNN's topic had nothing to do with that, and their conversation with an entire panel was talking about Stormy Daniels.
Oh, no. Who's from Louisiana, by the way. We're very proud of her.
I bet you are. So A couple questions for you. One, you walk the halls of Congress. You deal with these people.
When I can get through security, yes, I do.
Well, you probably no telling what you got hidden under your bandage there on your hand.
It's a whole nother story there.
But when you see these people, and no names, just on average, how impressed are you with the sheer intelligence of the members of Congress?
Well, it runs the gamut. I got to be honest with you, Mark. It's you've got some who just actually hosted a lunch or co-hosted a lunch in New Orleans for, and I'll mention his name, it's no problem, Congressman Tom Garrett out of Virginia's 5th District, who I was just remarkably impressed with his intellect. He's a big history nerd like me. We talk a lot about history. But then I meet some members who I'm wondering who put their pants on that morning, because they just, I don't have any idea how they got elected or how maybe they had to run for office because there's no way they could hold a job in the private sector. But it's diverse. I'll put it that way.
So when one of these people, Cory Booker or Maxine Waters, when they're running around,
or Ellison,
saying the crazy things that they say, do you think they believe a word of this, or is this is the crazy thing I need to say today to get attention?
Cory Booker, no. Waters and Ellison, yes. If that answers your question. I think Cory Booker is a pretty skilled politician, and I think he knows what his base wants to hear and what's going to get him a headline. And I'm not saying he doesn't believe most of what he says. I'm just saying it's probably some things he says deliberately. Congresswoman Waters been involved in some situations where she was very lucid and in command of what was going on. And then there's other times I was wondering if anybody was home, if the lights were on, but nobody was home. Ellison is, and I don't care if I say this publicly, he's a psychopath. I got kicked off of Twitter because of him. Yeah.
So you won't be lobbying his office. We got that part. So why is he a psychopath? Seriously, why is he crazy?
Well, because he is into the most, it's one thing to be extremely partisan, but he kind of takes it to almost a religious level, where I think that
he's
the guy
partisan.
Exactly. I think he wants all Republicans, and for that matter, all people of the Caucasian persuasion, to die. I really do believe that. Mm-hmm. He doesn't believe that he should be having to share free oxygen with us. So there's a lot of people I wish weren't around, but I recognize their right to exist, right? That's just part of humanity.
So when people run these, we see all these protests, and we had a guy on the show recently, and he was one of the original protesters in North Carolina in the gay pride parade. So he was there at the very beginning when there was 30 people in the parade, and people lined up and said, he used to spit on them and call them names. Now the parade is enormous. And he was banned this year from being in the parade because he wanted to have a pro-Donald Trump float. Now he brings up that there were 15 other Democratic floats in the gay pride parade, that the purpose of the parade is to display their what was the words there, Chuck? It was to display their diversity and inclusion. Right. It was to display diversity and inclusion, except diversity and inclusion of thought. But getting back to this whole protest, this whole thing, what's being done? Is anyone accomplishing anything with these marches, with I want to blow up the White House, I dream about blowing the White House up, and all this crazy
man marches and all this kind of stuff?
Listen, Martin Luther King himself said that if after the March on Selma, if everybody just would have went home, that nothing would have ever happened again. The Civil Rights Act, nothing. And even the progress that we've made to this day, none of it would have happened if they all just would have went home. 90-something% of all the protesters you see on TV go out, march in the streets, smoke a J, get on TV, and then go home. And they think that they accomplish something. If you get lucky and you end up being one of these like David Hogg type individuals where the media just keeps booking you and keeps putting you on TV, then, I don't think he's accomplishing anything, but he's certainly moving a narrative. But the more kind of disconnected he becomes apparent from the facts, I think his credibility diminishes. And I don't want to criticize an 18-year-old kid because he's not supposed to know all this stuff yet. The problem is that not only does he believe he knows it, but the media is putting him on TV and treating him like an expert. And he should probably at least get his first girl before he starts lecturing me about the Constitution.
So what is the thing to do if going to, so in your book you talk about the ineffectiveness of protesting?
Right.
Well, the town square has been around forever, literally forever, where someone stands up and starts talking about what they're doing, trying to get a bunch of people to go along with them, and then it grows to 50 people, 100 people. And now if you don't have 1 million people marching on something, then you're not successful.
Yeah, they look at numbers. And look, think of it like a marathon or a 5K. Think of the protest as the starting gun. But if nobody starts running, then the race is never going to get finished, right? So that's kind of what I try to teach people is to, when the starting, if it's a starting gun with no people running, then it's just a noise. And that's all protest is a noise, is how to run in the right direction to get to your personal finish line.
So how do you do that? Are you saying that protests are the beginning and people need to protest every day, or what is it?
They can be, but I find that these mass protests are so disjointed in message. I recently penned an article where I was talking about the day of inauguration here in Washington, D.C., and the Women's March was going right past my hotel. And, I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to be around that many morally casual ladies at one time, right? I need all the help I can get statistically. But the first ones I asked what they were protesting about just really started cursing me out and kind of, I guess, making me try to feel bad about the fact that I was born male. And then a little while later, these other two ladies who were definitely not, they were definitely pretty mad about Trump being inaugurated, but they were like, we're marching for, income inequality and sexual harassment in the workplace. And they were naming a lot of valid issues that are out there. And they said, but our protest march, whatever you want to call it, has been hijacked by people who, are being violent and nasty and, all this other kind of stuff. And it's taken away from this. So again, these big protests, it's hard to have that many people all there for the same reason. Right. So, it's just about kind of, I'll give you an example with the March for Our Lives rally. You had all these kids from Parkland High School, part of the speaking program. Well, one of them, Kyle Kashev, who is for some gun reforms, but not for repealing the Second Amendment, he went into the Capitol and met with a handful of members of Congress and went to the White House and met with President Trump. I guarantee he accomplished more in one day than all those hundreds of thousands of people outside chanting, because he actually went and worked the process. So that's probably the best example I could think of from a current event standpoint.
So how can we work the process?
So you buy my book, right? It's only $10. So
we start there.
And yeah, what's the name of the book again? Laws
and Sausage. You never want to see either one get made. It's on Amazon and Kindle. And you basically you learn, you have an issue, obviously a cause, something that you want to get accomplished, something you want to get changed. I don't care if it's changing a one-way street to a two-way in your hometown to, something on a federal level, like you said, banning lobbyists or controlling spending or things like that. You have to know how to approach your members the best way, the most effective way to get to their staff first, and what the buzzwords to say to the staff to actually get in front of the member, and then the buzzwords that they'll remember, because they meet with over 100 people a day, and it's very unlikely that they will remember you if you don't conduct a meeting properly.
I was talking to somebody, and they were saying, if you really want to get the attention of your congressman or your senator, every state and every city or every district has an office. Right. The senator has an office there. He may have one or two, but usually at least one. Congressmen have an office within, your district, wherever it is. And if you want to get their attention, handwrite a letter, walk that letter to their office and give it to them. Don't mail it. Don't call them. That's how you'll get their attention. Do you agree with that?
Almost. These days, members of Congress, even though they are in their district offices, sometimes when they're in the district, their schedule is even more truncated than when they're in D.C. So the chances of you being able to personally hand them a letter is probably not that good. What I would do is I would just kind of scour your media for an event that the congressperson's supposed to show up at. And I mean, don't scare them. Don't run up to them. But I mean, just hand them and say, listen, I wrote you this letter. I appreciate it. If you'd read it, they will take it, or they'll hand it to a staff or whatnot. And I can almost promise you 99% of them will read it. But trying to get them in their office, it depends. I mean, if you live in a really small rural area and there's a congressional office there, maybe that member's always there. I don't know. I know that in my experience, though, that when they're in the district, they are spoken for from dawn till dusk. And it's, if they even plan on seeing their families while they're there. Yeah.
Yeah. What I want to hear, Chuck, is Brian was just alluding to there are certain trigger words and things to say to get their attention. So I'd like to come back around to that after you take a break.
Yeah, we'll do this and take a break right now, and we'll be back with Brian Trascher.
I'd like to introduce you to a new type of podcast. And by new, I mean there's never been anything like this before, not in terms of scope or ambition. The show's called Living Beyond 120. Science proved that lifespan could exceed 120 years back in the 1960s. And the Bible first mentioned living to 120 years 6,000 years ago in the book of Genesis. But the question is, how do we get there? Living Beyond 120 tries to answer this question. The show is an exploration into human longevity and what it will take for us to live longer, healthier lives, featuring interviews with some of the most respected minds in longevity science and tackling big subjects like how the medical system, big pharma, and maybe even our own government don't want you to live longer. Living Beyond 120. It's hosted by me and my co-host, medical expert, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden. You'll find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast directory, and you can also listen to it at the website livingbeyond120.com.
It's good to have you back, Brian. Go ahead, Mark. You said you had a couple of questions about what?
Yeah, I know in your conversation there a minute ago, you had said that there are certain trigger words, certain things to say, to use in order to get remembered, that there's hundreds of people coming at them, and there's things to get it sounds like you're saying there are certain things we can do to get our message above the noise. What are those things?
So, when you're talking
other than buying your book.
Yeah, exactly. When you're meeting with the staff, which almost all the time, when you request an initial appointment, you're going to meet probably with a legislative assistant. And I tell people, don't feel bad about that. Don't think that because it's going to be a young person, probably in their 20s or 30s. But don't think that they don't have influence with the member or that they can't help you. They can. And it's very important to treat them with the same amount of respect that you would the actual member, because they don't have to pass your message on. They don't have to book you a follow-up appointment. You know what I'm saying? So,
just to put a little insert, people usually go to their congressman are usually mad. They're
exactly.
Mad about something. And it's not a good idea to go in and start yelling and screaming at the person you're going to talk to, correct?
That's absolutely right. Definitely don't sit here and say, my tax dollars pay your salary, because you know what? Your tax dollars pay police officer's salary too. Try bringing that up when he's writing you a ticket and see what happens. People don't have to help you just because they work for you, right? One of the things, especially on the congressional level, it's just about certain lingos. Like everybody on the Hill refers to, like when you're talking to a staffer, they refer to the member as your boss, your boss, your boss. It's not something we usually say in everyday America these days. You know what I'm saying? It's just not really part of the vernacular. But say, listen, I want to talk to your boss about this, or I saw your boss on TV said this, or whatever. And all that does is let them know that you're kind of in the club. This is not your first rodeo. You've been around the Rayburn building, the Cannon building. You've been around Longworth and Russell and Hart. Yeah, that's just for starters when you're talking with the staff. When I'm meeting with a member I haven't met before, I try to go and find out everything I can about them. I find out, where they went to college. I try to look through their hometown newspaper, see if their kid won the Little League championship, has a, just anything I can, right? Floor speeches, legislation that they've sponsored, even if it has nothing to do with my issue, just so when I go in, I can, make some small talk that's not obvious. You know what I mean? Like how's the weather? Like, hey, I saw that, somebody that, went to the University of Michigan. Yeah, I saw you tweeted out you actually made it to the Michigan Notre Dame game. How'd you find enough time to do that? And they'll be like, oh man, I had to ditch my staff and my wife had to let know. And it just kind of creates like a little bit of an ease. And it's, one thing, Chuck, you probably traveled all over the world, and in places like Europe and Latin America, you might spend 30, 45 minutes having an informal conversation before you ever get to business. Well, here in America, we don't really do that, and sometimes it's to our detriment. And I'm not saying you have to spend that long, but I think a good 3-4 minutes of just, oh, by the way, I saw you were on CNN last night, and I thought it was funny you said this or whatever. Anything like that. All these politicians love to talk about themselves, and if you let them,
Brian,
they will.
You just hit it right there, and I was going to emphasize that. I made my living listening to other people. That's what I did, basically, on Love Connection and things. I listened to their story. And then I commented, remarked on it, whatever. The best tool to go in with a politician, I would think, is to go in listening, not going in talking. Listen to them first, because they like to talk. And, give them an opportunity to talk about themselves and what they've accomplished and what they've done. Then, soften the delivery up a little bit. Let them talk about themselves and what they're doing. And then hit them with your issue.
But they won't do it. Most of them won't do it unless they're prompted, because, if you got 10, 15 minutes, they're going to sit down. They can be like, hey, welcome. Can I get you something to drink? Go. You know what I mean? And that's when you just kind of want to be, you don't want to be like, oh, hey, some weather we're having. The cherry blossoms look good outside. I mean, they don't want to hear that, just it's kind of make it by the way, make it very natural and organic. And then they will kind of talk about themselves. And another tip that I give people in the book is, hey, Congressman so-and-so, this assistant of yours, Clara, I mean, she's just been fantastic. She's been answering all my questions, and I'm really grateful that she was able to get me face to face with you to talk about my issue, because you compliment the staffer. It reassures that member that their staffer is doing a good job, but you just made them look good in front of their boss. And the next time you call, she will remember your name. She will answer your email, and she will appreciate you probably for the rest of the time she's working there. Mm-hmm. And keep doing that, because there's a lot of turnover in those offices. These are usually younger folks at the upper levels, chief of staff. They're more maybe kind of mid-career, career type folks. But, at the lower levels, usually college graduates, still in their 20s, they're doing other things with their life. There's turnover. So you got to get in there and meet the new and make friends with them too.
Yeah, it's honing your skills in communication, talking with people. And most people don't do that unless they have to.
Right.
On a federal level, would you go after the getting to know the staff in your hometown, or do we need to go after the staff that's in D.C.? Because, most of these people all have dual staffs.
It depends on what your resource level is like. If you're kind of a one-man show and you're not going to have the opportunity to travel to Washington, and by the way, if you are gonna go to Washington to meet with some members, I highly recommend getting at least 3 to 4 week lead time from the time you want to schedule your appointment, because a lot of their schedules are at least 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks in advance. Plus, you need time to book travel and all that. But going back to your question, it's just as good to meet with the local staff. However, most of the time they're going to end up referring you to people in the DC office, unless it's about a local issue. But there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I say get to know as many of them as you can. If you've found the member that's going to be the one that can help you, they're on the right committee, or they're a sponsor of a bill, I would get to know their staffs at home and in DC.
So I want to ask you just an inside question. So when you have somebody who is nuts, so I'm going to go back to Maxine Waters or Keith Ellison. You've got people that are just crazy. What's their staff like, and what does the staff do? Do they hire crazy staff, or does the staff realize they're working for a mad person and tries to manage it?
It's interesting you say that, because some of the people I consider, and this is just my opinion, it's subjective, but like the worst members of Congress sometimes have like the nicest staff. Like you wonder how these like sweet people can work for somebody who clearly is off their meds. I don't think Congresswoman Waters is crazy. I think that she has been in her seat so long that she feels invincible. She said some pretty crazy stuff and has been reelected. It's like that that old saying, the problem with political jokes is that they usually get reelected. And so she's had no consequences for anything she said. So she's willing to push the envelope. There's a lot of members that feel like she does, but would not say what she does because they're not as safe in their districts as she has been. Ellison is just crazy.
So take Ellison for a minute here. So Ellison, he's Calypso Louis, fan. He thinks we ought to kill all the white people.
Right.
Does he have a staff who thinks we should kill all the white people?
I've actually never been in his office, but so I can't answer that question honestly. But I would assume, if it's like most offices I've been into, at least the people you first engage with are people with, tremendous people skills. And I don't, I just don't think that they would carry the same kind of rhetoric their bosses would, because there's a lot. First of all, most of them are going to have other jobs within a year or two. And they probably just don't want to get wrapped up in that. Some of them, you might get some like true believers and maybe they're the same way. But fortunately, I have not. Probably the worst type of staffer that I would come across, and I call it staff infection. It's because people get on a congressional staff and all of a sudden think they know everything about the Hill, and you can't correct them because you're trying to get them to help you out, but you just have to sit there and listen to them tell you about why you're mistaken about something that you're 100% positive you're right about. And you just get past that and then to the ask.
So if David Duke, as an example, if David Duke was a sitting member of Congress,
Lord help us,
it would be political suicide on the part of other Congress people to ever even talk to him, let alone work with him or cooperate with him.
Yeah, he back when he was in the Louisiana legislature, he did work with some other folks, but he was still hiding his true colors, if you will, a little better back then. Now that everybody kind of knows what he is, I can't imagine that anybody would want to even be in the same room with him at the same time.
Okay. Now my question is, why do people try to work with a Keith Ellison when a David Duke would be ostracized and driven out of town on a rail because of his racism? Why do people bend over backward to accommodate Keith Ellison?
And why is he assistant to the DNC? I mean, good Lord, he's got a very high position.
Yeah, co-chair of
the DNC.
Well, I think that his position in the DNC is emblematic of the direction the DNC is going. They're just going more and more to the extreme left. It's a good question. I think that there is still a perception that racism can only be committed by one race of people, even though we know that's not true. It's intellectually incongruent, and we've seen it proven wrong time and time again, not just in America but in other countries. But it's still, when you hear the word racist, you're automatically thinking of some guys in white sheets, chasing some people of color, and that's not always the case, obviously.
An interesting thing is happening throughout Europe, and I wonder if it's happening here. All of these, Sweden and Norway and Germany and France and England, have brought in all of these Islamists, if you will, and they're committing crimes left over right on all of the citizenry who are in these countries. And the government continues to either cover up, which they do. There's no question about Sweden has covered up a lot of things. They not only cover it up, but they excuse it. And I think that that's happening to a certain extent here, certainly not on the level it is there, but it happens here. We seem to excuse certain people for their behavior, which is abhorrent, which we would never excuse a citizen for. Why do you think that is?
I think that people have become so sensitive, and it's I call it cultural Marxism or cultural terrorism. It's like, if you will hold back from a thought or belief or a statement just because the thought of being labeled a racist or a bigot is so potentially damaging to you or your reputation, that you basically censor yourself. And so it's like,
the left calls everybody a racist.
Of course they do. Yeah, of course. It's been working.
It's lost its power.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I've talked to some very, intellectual folks who happen to be African American that say that the word is now thrown so easily and loosely that it's either has or will lose all meaning in the future, because nobody can tell what a racist is. Because if a racist is a guy that lives in a Texas border town and doesn't want illegals coming into his town, but it's also a guy that is out there burning black churches, like, are they really the same thing? You know what I mean? So it's subjective, but it's a slippery slope that we're almost at the bottom of, in my opinion.
And is a guy who's out burning black churches any different than a white member of Congress or black member of Congress who wants death to white people?
Yeah, I mean, it's not illegal to say that, but when you're out there encouraging it, and look, I've always, it's kind of like, I think the president looks at, as much as he rails on about, Robert Mueller, I think he sees Mueller as his VIP, because the more Mueller comes up with, kind of tangential stuff that has nothing to do with his investigation, and it becomes more clear that he's just out to get him, the more the president's base kind of rises up in his defense. Let the Democrats keep putting people like that on TV, keep putting them in positions of power, and let everybody see the contrast between who's running both parties.
You make a good point there. I think that Trump has accomplished something that no one's ever been able to accomplish before for some unknown reason, and probably because of his style. He is so hated by the establishment and so feared by the establishment on both sides, on Republican and Democrat, not so much Republican, but certainly some, that he has allowed us to have a window into what the administrative state is really like. The deep state, as a lot of people like to call it, but it's basically just a bunch of bureaucrats who are really running our government. Elected officials come and go, but the bureaucrats stay there forever. Yeah. And this bureaucratic state that we have, I don't think most people really understood how lethal it can be to the American people. Forget Trump, but it's been so much vitriol thrown at Trump, so much hyperbole thrown at him, and he has fought back so hard that we're able to get a window into what in the world is going on in our government. And boy, it is not pretty.
Well, first of all, I'd say that I don't know too many 71-year-old guys with $3 billion in the bank that really care what other people think of them, and he's no exception to that rule. Although he does, kind of have an affinity to be loved and to be talked about in a positive light, but at the end of the day, he's going to say what he wants and do what he wants, because that's the way he's always done it, and he's always been successful by going with his gut. I tell people, he may not be the communicator Reagan was, but he's getting results like Reagan did. So at least you can figure on that.
Yeah, this whole thing has been style over substance. I mean, everyone is going against his style, and the substance is just. Oh,
he's a bull in a china shop. There's no doubt about it,
right.
And the guy can.
And it's what we've needed.
When they came out with that story the other day about, Kristen Nielsen drafting a letter of resignation just because, Trump supposedly chewed her out about Homeland Security.
Secretary, right?
Yeah, Homeland Security. Yes, Secretary. And I looked at somebody and I said, if you haven't had your ass completely chewed off by Trump, then you don't really work for him yet.
Yeah, right.
Well, this is Brian Trascher. Brian's book, The Law and Sausage That You Never Want to See Either One Made. You can get it on Amazon. And you said it's also in the Kindle store,
It's on
right?
Kindle. Yeah, that's correct.
Kindle store. So if you want to learn how to walk the halls of power and make something happen instead of going out in the park and wearing a vagina suit, you might want to buy Brian's book. Or you can just go buy a vagina suit and march all over town. I don't think that really gets you anywhere.
And soon we'll be coming out with the audiobook narrated by Chuck Woolery.
Yes, of course.
There you go. So Brian, here's the last thing I'm going to leave you with. From your point, from your inside point as a lobbyist working inside, what are the, 2 things, 3 things, what are the things that you can tell our audience that they can do to help safeguard America, to protect the Constitution, to make America great again? What's the wisdom that you've learned that you can share that we can go act on?
Well, first of all, I would say never, ever, no matter how good an idea sounds or how compelling an argument that anybody makes, never be willing to abandon anyone of our first 10 amendments to Bill of Rights without being willing to lay down your life for it, because there's a reason why they were listed 1 through 10, and there's a lot of people that would like to see 1, 2, or 3 of them go, and none of them can go. None of them. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is to understand that just because there are big money special interests and lobbyists and whatnot out there doing things maybe quicker or more artfully or more successfully than you think you could do on your own, just remember that, don't ever doubt that a handful of just thoughtful and committed citizens cannot change the world, because it's the only thing that ever has. And the last thing I would say is to just act professional. My book tries to give some people tips on how they can look like they're not a first timer, and sound like they're not a first timer, even if they are, and just understand that we have this government we have is a system, and it's a process, and you have to learn the process in order to make it work for you. I'm still convinced the only way to take down this government is from the inside. I don't think it'll ever be taken from the outside.
I agree with you. Yeah, that's the danger. Yeah. Thank you, Brian, very much. Really appreciate it, buddy. Glad you could take time out of your busy day at the airport there to talk with us and share with our audience. And we will do anything we can to help promote you. And if you need to come back and talk to us about something you're working on or something that you think is really important to talk about.
Yeah, it's February 2nd, Chuck Woolery Day, 2-2.
Yes, please don't ever do that. Thanks, Brian. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Appreciate having you. Well, Brian Trascher's an interesting guy. That's I've never talked to a lobbyist before. It's kind of interesting to get his point of view. He's interesting that he's a real patriot, I think, and so it was just kind of fascinating. There's such a negative connotation to the word lobbyist, and I didn't get that from him at all.
Yeah, I mean, there's good and bad in everything. Another guy who's a lobbyist who we've had on the show was former Congressman Connie Mack.
Right. Yeah,
he's working as a lobbyist now. And see, I'm not of the throw all the lobbyists out of Washington mindset, because I've had some experience there, and I do think that there are times when lobbyists accomplish very good things. It's the abuse. There's two sides to it.
It's like the difference between capitalism and crony capitalism. It really falls into that category. They can be very confusing because they both have the word capitalism in them, but one's negative and one's positive.
Well, here's where the difference is, Chuck. The difference is, I believe that a lobbyist who goes in and meets with members of Congress to explain a point of view on behalf of a constituent is legitimate. Right. I think where it crosses the line is I explain my point of view and I'll donate $250,000 to your charity if you agree with me.
Which is crony capitalism.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to correct it. It's not that we need to get rid of lobbyists. It's that we need to get rid of lobbying money.
Well, listen, if you've enjoyed our show today, I want you to leave a review on Stitcher or where else?
iTunes, iHeart.
Yeah, where?
iChuck.
iChuck and iHeart. Thanks, everybody.